Elias Thorne drags the chained savage Kaelin towards her grim fate. She meets his gaze, silent, defiant. "I won't let them break you," he whispers, a dangerous vow. A chilling detail about her journey, and the outpost's true purpose, ignites a betrayal. He must free her. Their brutal fight for freedom begins now. Elias Thorne, known to the sparse few who dared venture near his solitary peaks as the Bear, was a living legend woven into the fabric of the high mountains. His cabin, a fortress of rough-hewn logs, stood against a perpetual canvas of snow-dusted pines and granite giants, a testament to a life carved from the wilderness itself. Each morning, the scent of fresh pine needles and wood smoke mingled with the crisp, biting air as he emerged, his breath pluming like dragon's smoke against the dawn. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with a practiced rhythm as he sharpened his axe, the metallic clang echoing sharply in the absolute silence. For decades he had lived by the mountain's clock, guided by the sun, the stars, and the ancient wisdom of the land. His world was one of stoic survival, a realm where every decision held the weight of life or death, where comfort was found in the sturdy warmth of a bear pelt and the crackle of a stone hearth. He valued the profound quiet, the stark honesty of a landscape that demanded respect and offered no quarter. It was a brutal peace, hard-won and fiercely guarded. His eyes, the color of storm clouds over the peaks, held a deep knowing, a witness to countless human follies played out against the backdrop of nature's indifference. Society had long forgotten Elias Thorne, pushed him to the fringes where he was content to remain. But he, in turn, never forgot the subtle, insidious cruelty society inflicted upon those it deemed weak or different. A flicker of that understanding often crossed his face as he watched a lone hawk circle, or observed the meticulous patience of a wolf tracking its prey. He understood survival, not just of the body, but of the spirit. His days unfolded in a ritual of hunting, trapping, and carving, each task a meditation on self-reliance. He conversed with the wind, understood the whispers of the forest, and found companionship in the distant howl of a wolf. Yet beneath the rugged exterior, a deep current of dignity ran, born from the unwritten codes of the wild. He might have been a recluse, but he was not uncivilized. He knew the difference between a predator and a protector, between necessary survival and wanton cruelty. It was this inner compass, long dormant beneath layers of solitude, that would soon be tested. One frigid afternoon, a shadow fell across his threshold, a worn-out frontier sheriff, his face etched with the ravages of too many desolate miles. The man spoke of a task, a burden, a savage girl found wandering the plains, stripped of her heritage and now awaiting a dubious fate in a makeshift jail. The town wanted her gone, unseen, unheard. The sheriff believed Elias, with his remote cabin and grim reputation, was the perfect temporary guardian. The deal was simple, almost dismissive. Keep the young woman, Kaelin, for a few days, then bring her to a distant outpost. There would be gold, enough to buy supplies for a year, but the unspoken price was far heavier than any coin. As the sheriff spoke of the young woman's wildness, Elias felt a quiet unease. It was not the kind of wildness he knew, the kind that respected the land, but a label meant to dehumanize. He heard the words, but his intuition, honed by years of solitude, sensed a different truth, a deeper conspiracy brewing beneath the surface of the sheriff's weary pronouncements. He was being tasked with something far more complex than mere custody, something that would irrevocably shatter the hard-won peace of his secluded world and set him on a path he never imagined. The chilling wind, a constant companion in the high country, seemed to gather strength, carrying with it the scent of distant snow and the promise of a harsher winter. Elias Thorne, however, barely registered its bite. His attention was fixed on the grim spectacle before him, in the rudimentary jailhouse of the frontier town, a place of rough justice and even rougher conditions. There, amidst the shadows and the stench of unwashed humanity, sat the young woman the sheriff had described as a savage. Her name, he had been told, was Kaelin. She was indeed bound, her wrists chafed by crude iron manacles, her ankles similarly restrained. Yet it was not the chains that held his gaze, but the spirit that refused to be confined within them. Her hair, the color of twilight, cascaded around a face etched with a profound weariness, but her eyes, dark and deep like mountain pools, held an untamed fire. They darted, assessing, measuring, never quite settling, like a hawk trapped in a cage, its instinct to soar battling against its cruel reality. She was in her early 20s, her frame slender but taut with an inherent resilience, her features speaking of a heritage far older and more profound than the transient settlement around them. The rough buckskin tunic she wore, though torn and dirtied, still bore faint, intricate patterns, a ghost of the life she had been ripped from. A wave of something Elias had long thought dead within him stirred. It was not pity, for she carried herself with a fierce, quiet dignity that scorned such a feeling. It was recognition. In her indomitable gaze, in the silent accusation of her posture, he saw an echo of his own forced solitude, the same society that had cast him out now seeking to break her. He, too, had been judged, deemed unfit, and pushed to the wild edges of existence. The empathy, a spark he believed had been extinguished decades ago, now flared, ignited by the silent cruelty etched onto her skin, into her very being. This was not a burden to be transported, he realized with a jolt that went to his very marrow. This was a soul crying out for the freedom he had so jealously guarded for himself. The raw, visceral truth of it settled heavy in his chest, an undeniable, unwelcome weight. The sheriff, oblivious to the silent battle raging within the mountain man, rattled off instructions. The outpost was a 2-day journey east, a cluster of dilapidated buildings nestled in a minor valley, supposedly a place of re-education for the native problem. Elias was to deliver her, collect his gold, and be done with it. But as he took the crude rope that led to Kalen's shackles, his fingers brushed against the cold metal, and a subtle shiver ran through him. He saw the sheriff's eyes shift away, avoiding his own, a flicker of something close to shame or perhaps discomfort, clouding the man's face. The chains themselves seemed too robust, too final for a temporary hold, and the outpost, a memory stirred. A snippet of a distant conversation, of men speaking of remote sites not for rehabilitation, but for forced labor, places where those considered inconvenient simply vanished. The detail was fleeting, an almost forgotten piece of gossip, but now it landed with unsettling clarity. It was not a school. It was a prison, a permanent silencing. The promise of re-education was a lie. He led her out of the jail, the townsfolk's furtive stares a palpable burden. The clinking of her chains against the frozen earth was the only sound in the crisp air, a mournful counterpoint to the growing resolve in Elias's heart. He mounted his horse, then helped her onto the back of another, his movements rough but careful, avoiding eye contact as much as possible, yet keenly aware of the vulnerability of the woman before him. Their journey began, a tense ballet of enforced proximity and simmering distrust. The only sounds for miles the creak of leather, the snort of the horses, and the ceaseless sigh of the wind. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple and angry orange, as they left the last vestiges of human settlement behind. The silence of the mountains, usually a balm, now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken questions and unknown dangers. Elias knew this land as intimately as he knew his own breath. Every hidden trail, every treacherous ravine, every secret shelter. But he was no longer just guiding himself. He was guiding another, one who depended solely on him, an unexpected weight, an unforeseen responsibility. With each step into the gathering gloom of the wilderness, Elias Thorne crossed a threshold not just of geography, but of destiny. The cold, impersonal agreement he had made was shattering, replaced by a growing, undeniable commitment. He could feel it in his bones, a shift in the very axis of his existence. He took a deep, bracing breath of the icy air, the first real breath he felt he had taken since seeing her. His old life, his solitude was receding with the fading light, replaced by the daunting, yet strangely exhilarating prospect of an unknown path, inextricably linked to the silent, captive woman riding just before him. Days bled into nights as they journeyed deeper into the formidable heart of the mountains. The vast, snow-laden expanse became their solitary world, a silent witness to a tense, fragile dance between two strangers. Elias moved with the ingrained efficiency of a creature born of the wild, his senses alert to every shift in the wind, every distant snap of a twig. Kaylin, though still bound, observed him with an unwavering intensity. Her silence was a cloak, but her eyes, ever watchful, absorbed every lesson, every movement of his skilled hands as he set traps, built fires, or navigated the treacherous terrain. He taught her, not with words, but with actions. He showed her how to read the subtle signs of an approaching blizzard in the sky, how to find potable water beneath layers of ice, how to distinguish edible berries from poisonous ones, and the precise, respectful way to field dress a deer. It was a language of survival, etched into the very fabric of the mountains, and Kaylin, despite her captivity, proved an adept student. She learned to tend the fire with a careful hand, its warmth becoming their shared sanctuary against the biting cold, its flames dancing against the backdrop of their temporary, isolated camps. The rough texture of the bear pelts, which served as their meager bedding, became a small comfort in the vast, indifferent wilderness. The only light in the suffocating darkness of the mountain nights was the flickering glow of their hearth, a small, defiant beacon against the overwhelming black. Their communication remained minimal, mostly gestures and the occasional guttural sound from Elias, a gruff instruction or warning. Yet, a peculiar form of understanding began to bloom between them. He noticed her innate grace, the way she moved with the quiet stealth of a forest creature, how her gaze followed the flight of an eagle with an almost spiritual reverence. He saw that her wildness was not a flaw, but a deep, resonant connection to the natural world, a kinship he himself possessed. And Kaylin, in turn, began to perceive the true nature of the man beside her. He was not cruel, not indifferent. His gruffness was a shield, his solitude a choice, born of past wounds she could only guess at. She felt for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a nascent sense of protection, not of confinement, but of genuine guardianship. They were nearing the halfway point, a remote hunting cabin Elias maintained, a place even more secluded than his primary home. It was a temporary refuge, a shelter built into the rock face, camouflaged by pines, a secret known only to him. As they approached, Kaylin's gaze fell upon a peculiar carving etched into a gnarled pine tree at the edge of the clearing. It was an ancient symbol, a swirling pattern that resonated with something deep within her memory, a marking from her own people. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of recognition mixed with a profound confusion. How could this symbol, from a tribe so distant and hidden, be here, at the threshold of this mountain man's secret sanctuary? The discovery was subtle, but it planted a seed of doubt, suggesting a connection more profound than mere chance. They dismounted, the horse's breath steaming in the frigid air. Elias led Kaylin to the cabin, the heavy wooden door creaking open to reveal a single, sparsely furnished room dominated by a stone hearth. The air inside was cold, thick with the scent of pine and long dormant ashes. He gestured to a corner, a simple bed of furs laid upon dried branches. He then looked at her, his storm-cloud eyes meeting her unwavering gaze. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, rough with disuse. He told her she could stay for now. The mountain demanded work, he explained. Survival was a shared burden here, not a passive gift. She was not a guest, nor a prisoner in the traditional sense, but an inhabitant of his world, bound by its harsh, unyielding laws. He made it clear, without a hint of sentiment, that her presence, though tolerated, was contingent. He offered no comfort, no empty promises of warmth or ease. Instead, he offered a sanctuary, a fragile refuge in exchange for utility, for adherence to the stark rules of that wild place. And as he spoke, his gaze swept over the still shackled Kaylin, a silent question hanging in the air. Would she accept the terms of this unusual, unspoken bargain? The silence that followed was as vast and ancient as the mountains themselves, awaiting her unspoken answer. Life within the secluded mountain cabin settled into a new, unexpected rhythm. Kaylin, stripped of her ancestral lands and her freedom, now faced the brutal practicality of the wild, her every action a testament to resilience. Elias, ever watchful, observed her with an almost scientific detachment at first. He had expected resistance, perhaps resentment. Instead, he found a quiet determination. She learned to chop firewood with surprising strength, the sharp reports of the axe a new sound in the previously solitary quiet, its scent mingling with the ever-present smell of pine. She mastered the art of curing pelts, her nimble fingers working with an innate grace that spoke of generations of skill. She carried water from the frozen stream, her steps sure-footed on the icy paths. Initially, Elias had seen her as another mouth to feed, another responsibility, but Kaylin began to quietly assert her value, transforming the crude cabin from a mere survival post into something akin to a home. She took to mending his threadbare garments with stitches so fine they seemed to disappear into the fabric, turning worn-out hides into surprisingly soft blankets. With keen observation, she identified wild herbs and roots from the surrounding forests, concocting remedies for his aches and pains, her knowledge a silent gift from a world he had only ever seen from afar. The cabin, once filled only with the scent of wood smoke and Elias's solitude, now subtly held the fragrance of drying herbs and freshly baked bread she learned to make in their small oven. Her presence was a quiet revolution. Elias, who had lived for so long in Spartan austerity, found himself increasingly drawn to the small, domestic transformations. A rough-hewn table, once perpetually cluttered with traps and tools, now often bore a simple meal carefully prepared. The harshness of his isolated existence began to soften at the edges, warmed by Kaylin's quiet ministrations. He still saw the hawk in her eyes, the untamed spirit, but he also saw the gentle hands, the patient care, the profound wisdom she carried. He began to understand that her strength was not the brute force he respected in the wild, but a deeper, more enduring resilience of the heart and mind. Her capacity for nurturing, for finding beauty and purpose in the harshest conditions, was a revelation. He started leaving her small gifts, a particularly soft hide, a rare bird feather, a piece of smooth river stone. These were not gestures of courtship, but of an unspoken, growing respect, a recognition of her unique spirit. One evening, as a fierce blizzard raged outside, rattling the cabin walls and shrouding the world in an impenetrable white, Elias returned from checking his trap lines, soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. He collapsed by the fire, his teeth chattering. Kaylin, without a word, brewed a steaming concoction of potent herbs. She pressed the warm mug into his hands, her touch surprisingly gentle. Then, with an almost imperceptible hesitation, she sat beside him and began to rub his numb hands, her warmth slowly seeping into his chilled flesh. Elias, who had not known such a touch in decades, felt an unfamiliar sensation bloom in his chest, a hesitant warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was in that moment, as the storm howled its fury, that he truly recognized her as an equal, a partner, a beacon of an unexpected vital warmth. Yet this fragile peace, this burgeoning understanding, was suddenly, brutally shattered. A harsh crack echoed through the deep woods, followed by the distant baying of hounds, their cries cutting through the muffled silence of the snow. It was a sound Elias knew well, a sound that spoke of human intrusion, of a world that refused to leave them in peace. His eyes, now hardened again, met Kaylin's, which instantly mirrored his own alarm, the quiet domesticity of their evening abruptly torn away. The dogs were close, too close, and with them, he knew, would come the men. The sanctuary he had offered, the fragile home they had begun to build, was about to be put to its most severe test, threatening to unravel everything they had quietly, painstakingly forged. The baying of the hounds grew closer, the sound a chilling knell against the pristine silence of the snow-laden mountains. Elias Thorne, his face grim, moved with practiced urgency, securing the cabin. Kaelin watched him, her fear palpable, but her eyes remained steady, reflecting a newfound resolve. It was not the bounty hunters he feared most, but the threat they posed to the fragile trust that had grown between them, to the sanctuary they had silently claimed. This was no longer just about his survival. It was about hers, about the unspoken promise he now felt bound to keep. Suddenly, a sharp, ragged scream tore through the night, followed by the panicked whinny of a horse. Elias froze. The sounds came from the direction of the ravine, a treacherous, ice-slicked chasm known for its hidden dangers. It was a place where even the most seasoned mountain man could lose his footing. A chilling realization struck him. The men, unaccustomed to the mountain's brutal whims, were in trouble. A part of him, the old, solitary Elias, urged him to stay hidden, to let the mountain claim its own. But the new Elias, the one whose heart had been subtly softened by Kaelin's presence, could not. He knew the ravine's cruel secrets, the precise spot where the ice gave way, where a hidden crevice waited to swallow the unwary. "Stay here," he rumbled, his voice low and urgent, grabbing his rifle. Kaelin nodded, her hand instinctively going to the small, curved hunting knife he had given her. She understood. Elias moved like a phantom through the snow-laden pines, his buckskin blending with the shadows. He found them at the ravine's edge, two men, bounty hunters, their faces contorted in terror, one barely clinging to a thin root, his leg caught in a hidden trap, the other desperately trying to haul him up, both on the verge of plunging into the icy depths. Their horse, its leg broken, lay thrashing in a nearby snowdrift. The lead bounty hunter, a burly man named Silas known for his ruthlessness, looked up, his eyes wide with desperate fear, as he saw Elias. His face, usually a mask of grim determination, was now pale and helpless. Elias did not hesitate. With powerful, deliberate movements, he secured a rope around a sturdy pine, then threw the other end down to the struggling men. He guided them, his voice sharp with commands, telling them exactly where to place their feet, how to distribute their weight. He knew the ice could give at any moment. He worked with a precision born of years navigating such dangers, pulling with a strength that belied his age, his muscles straining against the immense weight. Finally, with a grunt, he hauled the last man onto solid ground. The two bounty hunters lay gasping, soaked and shivering, their bravado stripped away by the raw terror of their near demise. Silas, still panting, stared at Elias, a complex mix of fear and stunned gratitude in his eyes. He had come to capture Kaelin, to reclaim her for the reward, but now he owed his life to the very man he hunted. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the whimpering wind. Elias stood over them, his rifle held loosely, but his gaze was unwavering. Then the emotional dam between Elias and Kaelin broke. As they returned to the cabin, the crisis averted. The unspoken questions of their past, their mutual solitude, could no longer be contained. They sat by the fire, its flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. Elias, his voice rough with remembered grief, began to speak of his own abandonment, of the loss of his family to a brutal winter and an unforgiving land, of the betrayal that had driven him into the solitude of the mountains. He spoke of the ache of loneliness, of the raw wound that had never truly healed. Kaelin listened, her dark eyes filled with a profound understanding. When he finished, she looked at him, not with pity, but with a shared sorrow. She then spoke, her voice soft but firm, recounting her own tale of loss. She told of her village, hidden deep in a remote valley, wiped out by a sudden disease brought by encroaching settlers, of her capture, and the crushing weight of having her identity, her language, her very spirit, deemed worthless. She spoke of the fear, the hunger, the constant threat of being erased. The truth, the shocking truth, was not an external event, but the revelation of their shared vulnerabilities, their parallel journeys of suffering and loss. It was in that exchange, by the flickering light of the hearth, that their partnership, forged in the crucible of the mountains, solidified. They were two outcasts, bound not by chains, but by a profound, mutual recognition of pain and resilience, building a new, fragile world together. Silas, the bounty hunter, watched them from the shadows, hidden just beyond the cabin's light, still numb from his near-death experience. He had seen the raw honesty in their eyes, the shared confession that transcended language and culture. He had come for Kaelin, expecting to find a wild savage and a gruff protector. Instead, he had witnessed two souls finding solace and healing in each other's wounds. The gold now seemed a paltry sum compared to the life he had almost lost, and the profound, unexpected truth he had just stumbled upon. The hunt, he realized with a jolt, was over, but not in the way he had ever intended. A new, unexpected respect, laced with a complicated sense of obligation, began to form in his hardened heart. He would not return for them, not ever. His world, too, had shifted on its axis, his purpose now irrevocably changed by the kindness of the man he was sent to capture, and the unspoken strength of the woman he was meant to deliver. With the threat of the bounty hunters receded, not through violence but through an unexpected act of mercy, a profound peace settled over the mountain cabin. The air, once thick with tension, now carried the comforting scent of wood smoke and pine, mingling with the subtle aroma of Kaelin's medicinal herbs. Elias and Kaelin found themselves in a period of quiet grace, a stolen calm after the storm. Their days unfolded in a shared rhythm, a silent symphony of partnership and growing affection. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized by an unspoken understanding. Elias taught Kaelin to track game with the silent patience of a predator, showing her how to read the faint imprints in the snow, the subtle breaks in branches that marked an animal's passage. She, in turn, showed him how to infuse the simple cabin with warmth and light, crafting intricate patterns on the windows with frozen breath, weaving small, colorful decorations from dried grasses and berries. In the evenings, they would sit by the roaring fire, its flames dancing against the rough-hewn walls, the only sound the crackle of burning logs and the distant howl of a wolf. They spoke little, but their presence was a balm, a quiet affirmation of their growing bond. Elias found himself sharing stories of his youth, of a time before the mountains claimed him, and Kaelin, with soft eyes, listened and shared fragmented memories of her own people, of their songs and their respect for the earth. Their connection deepened, not with grand gestures, but with small, tender acts. He would carve her a new spoon, perfectly shaped for her hand, or leave a freshly caught fish by the stream for her to find. She would brew him special teas for his sore muscles, or mend a tear in his coat with painstaking care. The solitude that had once defined Elias now felt hollow without her presence. The quiet warmth that Kaelin radiated filled a void in his heart he hadn't known existed. Love in this harsh wilderness was not a fleeting emotion, but a deep-rooted commitment, a testament to shared survival and mutual respect. Their hands, calloused and strong, often brushed when passing tools, and in those brief contacts, a spark, undeniable and warm, would pass between them. One blustery afternoon, while preparing the traps near a cluster of ancient snow-covered cedars, Kaelin noticed a series of distinct markings etched into the bark of one of the largest trees. They were old, almost faded, but unmistakable, the same swirling pattern she had seen carved on the pine near the cabin, a symbol of her people. But this time, directly beneath it was another carving, equally ancient, a crude but recognizable bear, the very symbol Elias had used to mark his traps for decades. A shiver ran down her spine, a profound sense of predestination. Her people, or at least some of them, had once wandered these very mountains, revered the same land, perhaps even encountered Elias's ancestors. Their destinies, it seemed, were not just intertwined by circumstance, but by an ancient thread, a shared heritage with this wild land itself. The mountains had not just brought them together, they had been waiting for them. This newfound serenity, however, was as fragile as the first bloom of spring in the high country. As the last embers of the day faded and the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, a distant drumbeat began to echo through the valleys. It was a faint, almost imperceptible thrum at first, carried on the frigid wind, But it quickly grew stronger, more insistent. It was not the familiar rhythm of the mountain's pulse, nor the beat of animal hooves. This was the deliberate, ominous sound of human intent, a steady, measured beat that spoke of purpose and numbers. Elias, his senses honed by years of living on the edge, felt a cold dread seep into his bones. His eyes met Kalen's across the crackling fire, reflecting the same grim understanding. The fragile peace was broken. The world outside, the world that had cast them out, was coming for them once more, its intentions as clear and relentless as the beating drum. The rhythmic pulse of the drums grew louder, a chilling prophecy of the impending threat. Elias, the solitary mountain man, no longer felt the familiar tremor of fear for himself. His heart now thrummed with a fierce protective instinct for Kalen, for the fragile home they had forged against all odds. His reclusive sanctuary, once impenetrable, was now a target, and the stakes were higher than ever before. This was not a fight for survival alone, but for the very essence of their shared future, for the sacred bond that had blossomed in the unforgiving wilderness. As the morning light painted the eastern peaks in hues of bruised purple and cold silver, the source of the drumbeats became horrifyingly clear. A large contingent of men emerged from the tree line, a dark stain against the pristine snow. These were not just bounty hunters. Leading them was a figure Elias recognized from whispers in town, a man known as Bartholomew Bart Caldwell, a ruthless land speculator and former ranch owner, notorious for his cruelty and his insatiable greed for territory. He had lost a fortune on the plains and now sought to carve out a new empire in the very mountains Elias called home. Beside him, dressed in the uniform of a territorial marshal, rode Silas, the same bounty hunter whose life Elias had spared in the ravine. Silas's face was grim, unreadable, but the subtle stiffness of his posture spoke volumes of a man caught between old allegiances and new debts. Caldwell's men were a motley crew, roughnecks, drifters, and a few disgruntled ex-soldiers, all armed with rifles and a chilling sense of purpose. They were not here for the bounty on Kalen, not primarily. They were here for the land, for the rich timber, the rumored mineral deposits, and the strategic pass Elias's cabin guarded. Kalen, the savage girl, was merely an excuse, a piece of property Caldwell intended to claim as part of his new domain, a symbol of his dominion over the wild. He had likely used the initial pursuit of Kalen as a pretext to infiltrate the mountains and scout out prime locations. The drumbeats were not just a warning, they were a territorial claim. From their concealed vantage point on a rocky outcrop above the cabin, Elias and Kalen watched the approaching force. The sight confirmed Elias's deepest fears. This was a coordinated effort to seize control, to tame the wild places he held sacred. He saw Caldwell point towards the cabin with a proprietary gesture, his voice, though muffled by distance, carrying the unmistakable ring of arrogance. Kalen clutched Elias's arm, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. She understood. This was not about her past. It was about preventing them from having a future. A chilling realization struck Elias. Caldwell's true target was not just the land, but Kalen herself, as a means to solidify his claim, to break the spirit of the mountain and its inhabitants. Elias had heard rumors of Caldwell's brutal methods of civilizing the land, forcing out any who stood in his way, especially the native peoples. Kalen, in his eyes, was a valuable pawn, a symbol to be subjugated, proof that even the wildest spirits could be broken and bent to his will. The marshal's presence added a veneer of legality to Caldwell's rapacious intent, making their struggle even more desperate. Elias knew he could fight, perhaps even win, against a handful of men. But this force was too large, too well equipped. He looked at Kalen, her face a mask of resolve. They could not outrun them, not with such numbers. A desperate plan began to form in his mind, a terrible choice that ripped at his heart. He looked at the vast, snowy peaks around them, the silent witnesses to his growing desperation. He had vowed to protect her, to set her free, and sometimes freedom came at an unbearable cost. He turned to Kalen, his eyes filled with a profound sorrow, and spoke, his voice barely a whisper. He told her there was only one way to ensure their safety, one path to preserve the sacred space they had found. He explained that if one of them were to give themselves up, to offer a temporary surrender, it might buy the other time, allow for an escape, for a chance to rally unseen forces or plan a counterattack. He spoke of sacrifice, of a difficult path, but one that might save them both. Kaylin's hand tightened on his arm, her gaze piercing his. She understood the unspoken implication. One of them would have to face the wolves alone, to buy time for the other. Her eyes, filled with unshed tears but unwavering in their resolve, met his. She knew what he was suggesting, and a chilling, determined silence settled between them, a silent agreement to a terrible, necessary choice. The icy wind bit at their faces as Elias and Kaylin descended toward the cabin, the distant shouts of Caldwell's men growing louder, more menacing. The terrible choice had been made silently, unequivocally in the shared language of their souls. Elias would confront the aggressors, creating a diversion, drawing their focus while Kaylin, using her knowledge of the hidden mountain paths and her inherent stealth, would attempt to escape, to seek a safer refuge, to rally unseen allies. It was a gamble, a desperate, heart-wrenching play for survival. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Kaylin melted into the shadows of the pines, her movements as fluid and silent as a mountain cat. Elias emerged into the open, his rifle held ready, a formidable silhouette against the backdrop of his cabin. Caldwell's men, startled by his sudden appearance, raised their weapons, their faces a mixture of surprise and triumph. Caldwell himself, astride a powerful stallion, sneered, his eyes glinting with avarice. "Well, well, the bear comes out of his den," Caldwell boomed, his voice echoing across the snow. "Where's the savage girl, Thorn? Hand her over and we can discuss the terms of your continued residence." Elias stood his ground, a rock in the face of the encroaching tide. He had no intention of handing Kaylin over. He raised his rifle, not to fire, but to signify his unwavering defiance. This was a battle of wills, of principles against greed. Caldwell, infuriated by the resistance, ordered his men forward. The confrontation quickly devolved into a brutal struggle. Elias, a master of the terrain, used every trick and trap the mountain had taught him. He moved like a ghost, drawing men into snowdrifts, tripping them with hidden roots, using the dense thicket of pines to his advantage. The crack of his rifle echoed, a warning, not a killing shot, aimed to disable, to disarm, to deter. He fought with a desperate, animalistic ferocity, driven by the image of Kaylin, free and safe. Suddenly, a shot rang out, not from Caldwell's men, but from the surrounding forest, striking one of Caldwell's lieutenants in the shoulder. Then another, disabling a horse. Confusion erupted among the invaders. From the pines emerged not Kaylin, but a small group of figures, hardened mountain dwellers, trappers, and prospectors who had long respected Elias Thorn's unwritten rule of the wilderness. Among them, limping slightly but with a grim determination, was Silas, the bounty hunter Elias had saved. His face, still pale from his near-death experience in the ravine, held a fierce resolve. He had not truly left. He had circled back, drawn by a debt he could not ignore. "Caldwell, this ends now." Silas's voice, though hoarse, carried authority. "This land ain't yours to take, and that girl ain't a possession." Caldwell, enraged by this unexpected betrayal, ordered his men to fire upon Silas and his small band. The clearing became a maelstrom of gunfire and shouts. Elias, now fighting alongside these unexpected allies, moved with renewed purpose, his knowledge of the land proving invaluable. He knew the hidden paths, the natural defenses, turning the very mountain against its invaders. In the midst of the chaos, Caldwell made a desperate charge towards Elias, a glint of steel in his hand. Elias met him, not with brute force, but with a cunning born of the wild. He ducked under Caldwell's swing, then used his momentum, leveraging the treacherous icy ground, to send the larger man sprawling. Caldwell slid, tumbling helplessly towards a frozen stream, his momentum carrying him towards a patch of thin ice. Elias, seeing the danger, could have let him go, allowed the mountain to claim its own. But a flicker of the empathy that Kalin had rekindled stopped him. He grabbed a branch, extending it to the struggling Caldwell, offering a lifeline. "This is not your land, Caldwell," Elias rumbled, his voice low and steady. "And this is not how men settle disputes." Caldwell, his face a mask of defeat and shock, gripped the branch, hauling himself back to safety, his lust for power momentarily replaced by a raw, primal fear. His men, seeing their leader bested and facing the unexpected resistance from Elias and his allies, began to waver. Their pursuit of easy gain shattered by the fierce defense and the unwavering moral fortitude of the mountain man. The last of Caldwell's men, disheartened and disoriented, began to retreat, leaving behind a few wounded and the broken promise of their conquest. Caldwell himself, humiliated, scrambled onto his horse, casting a venomous glance back at Elias, a silent vow of future vengeance burning in his eyes. He disappeared into the tree line, a small, dark figure swallowed by the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The immediate threat was gone, the battle won. But Elias knew, with the deep certainty of a man who had lived a lifetime on the edge, that such men rarely surrendered entirely. The mountain might have repelled them this day, but the seeds of conflict often held roots that ran far deeper than the snow. The world remained a dangerous place, and their hard-won peace was, and always would be, a fragile thing. 1 year later, the mountain cabin, once a solitary bastion against the world, hummed with a quiet, profound warmth. The biting wind still swept across the peaks, and the snow still piled deep, but within its sturdy log walls, a new life had taken root, vibrant and undeniable. Elias Thorne, the bear, was no longer a lone wolf. His calloused hands still worked with the same practiced efficiency, but now they also held a tenderness, a gentle touch that softened the harsh edges of his existence. The cabin was transformed, infused with Kalin's spirit. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with their earthy scent. Colorful woven blankets adorned the simple beds, and small, intricate carvings, made by Kalin, decorated the shelves. The hearth, once a mere source of heat, now blazed with a constant, welcoming light, its warmth reflecting the peace in their hearts. Elias watched Kalin as she moved about the cabin, her steps light, her dark hair often catching the firelight. Her face, once etched with the shadows of past suffering, now glowed with a quiet contentment, her eyes holding a deep, abiding peace. She was no longer a prisoner, nor a refugee, but the heart of their wild home, and in her arms, cradled close, was a testament to their enduring love, a symbol of their shared future, their first child, a small, bundled infant sleeping soundly. The baby's cries, soft coos, and tiny grasping fingers had become the new music of the cabin, a melody of hope and rebirth. This child, born of the mountains, represented not just their union, but the complete healing of their ancient wounds, the blossoming of a legacy forged in adversity. Elias would often sit by the fire, holding his child, marveling at the tiny face, seeing in it not just his own rugged features, but the fierce spirit and quiet strength of Kalin. The wild man had found his family, and the lost woman had found her home. The conflict with Caldwell had receded into a cautionary tale, a legend whispered around campfires by the mountain men who occasionally passed through. They spoke of Elias Thorne's improbable mercy, of the unforeseen alliance that had driven the land speculator away. Caldwell himself had never truly recovered from the humiliation and the unexpected resistance. His ambition shattered. He eventually drifted south, his name fading into obscurity, a reminder that greed could not conquer the spirit of the free. Silas, the former bounty hunter, occasionally ventured to the cabin, not as a threat, but as a silent friend, sometimes leaving a rare trapping or a bag of flour, his debt repaid in quiet loyalty. The ancient carvings on the cedar tree and the pine, those symbols of Kalin's people and Elias's long lineage, now seemed to merge, speaking of a deeper connection, a predestined union. Their child carried within them the blood of both the mountain man and the forgotten tribes, a bridge between worlds, a living testament to resilience. It was said by the few who knew them that the spirits of the mountains themselves had blessed their union, recognizing in them the true guardians of the wild. The world outside might continue its endless march of progress and conflict, but within the sanctity of their mountain home, Elias and Calin had built a different kind of kingdom. It was a kingdom not of gold or power, but of love, respect, and mutual protection. Their journey had taught them that courage was not always found in the roar of a battle, but often in the quiet, steadfast actions of everyday devotion. They had discovered that family was not merely a matter of blood, but of the bonds forged in shared sacrifice, in the fierce loyalty of two pariahs who had chosen to build a home together. And that home, they knew, was not a fixed place on a map, but a feeling of belonging, a profound sense of peace and security, found only in the embrace of a love as wild and enduring as the mountains themselves. Their story was a testament that even in the most brutal corners of the frontier, a heart could find its true haven, and dignity could bloom in the shared freedom of two souls, forever intertwined. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.